My great-aunt Ilara was a creature of myth in our family. We knew she existed in the same way one knows about rare, deep-sea, fish-through second-hand stories and a few faded sepia-toned photographs. She was the artist who had decamped for Europe in the roaring 20s and simply never came back. My father had a vague childhood memory of a woman in an eccentric cloche hat who smelled of turpentine and foreign cigarettes. She died in St. Petersburg, Russia, at the age of 98, in a cavernous apartment on the Petrograd side, leaving behind a single, baffling instruction that her entire estate was to be left to her great-nephew, to me, Alex. I was 34, working as an appraiser in a small, dusty antiques shop. My life had acquired the same patina of predictability as the objects I handled. I could spot a forgery by the scent of its varnish and the weight of its porcelain, yet I was utterly incapable of assessing the value of my own life. My older sister Lena, a pragmatic lawyer with a mortgage and a deep-seated belief in sensible choices, had already labeled the inheritance Ilara's curse. "Alex, just think about it," she'd said over the phone as I took the train to St. Petersburg. "An apartment nobody has cleaned in 50 years. It's probably a ruin. Just get a local agent to sell it, sight unseen. We can split the money. It's the only sane thing to do." But I couldn't. I had to see it for myself. The apartment wasn't merely cluttered. It was a masterpiece of curated chaos. Mountains of books in a dozen languages, stacks of yellowed newspapers from forgotten eras, canvases turned to face the walls, crates of theatrical props, and mannequins draped in flapper dresses from the Jazz Age. The air was thick, syrupy, a concoction of dust, oil paints, and a sweet, lingering scent of lavender and old paper. It felt less like a home and more like the archives of a dozen fascinating, fully lived lives. I spent the first week in a state of archaeological awe, simply trying to clear a path from the door to the window. The task was supposed to be simple: catalog anything of value and have the rest cleared out. But every object I touched seemed to hum with its own history. I found a bundle of letters from Marc Chagall, a draft of an unpublished poem by Anna Akhmatova, a dried rose pressed inside a volume of Rimbaud. Ilara wasn't just an artist. She had been the quiet center of a long-vanished universe. It was in the furthest room, buried under a pile of rolled-up Persian rugs, that I found it. A massive, iron-bound trunk that looked like it had been salvaged from a pirate galleon. There was no lock to pick. It was sealed. A thick, crude but effective line of lead had been soldered along the entire seam of the lid. It took me the better part of a day with a hacksaw and a crowbar to break the seal. When the lid finally groaned open, the scent of naphthalene and ancient paper billowed out. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single object. It was a musical score, bound in thick, black leather. On the cover, embossed in faded gold leaf, were 3 words: "The Symphony of Echoes." There was no composer's name. I opened it and understood nothing. I have a passing knowledge of music from childhood piano lessons, but this was a form of beautiful madness. The orchestration was impossible. It called for instruments I'd only read about in obscure books: a glass harmonica, a serpenticlide, a keyed fiddle. The notation itself was alien. Some notes were drawn as intricate spirals, others like crystalline lattices. The tempo markings shifted from largo funebre, funereally slow, to furioso impossibile, impossibly furious. And the strangest part, entire pages were filled with nothing but rests, measures of structured silence where no instrument played. It was music designed not to be heard. My professional curiosity was piqued. I photographed a few pages and sent them to an old university friend, Julian, now a professor at a prestigious conservatory. His reply came an hour later, a single capitalized word. "How?" I called him. He was practically vibrating with academic excitement and disbelief. "Alex, "This is either the work of a forgotten genius or a complete lunatic," he said, his words tumbling over each other. "No one has ever written anything like this. It's theoretically unperformable. Some of the violin chords would require the player to have 3 hands. The rhythmic structure. It violates known laws of composition. It reads more like a mathematical equation or a celestial map than music. Where did you get this?" I told him about Alara. He insisted I bring the score back with me, that it was a musicological bombshell. But something held me back. This felt intensely personal. Alara hadn't soldered this masterpiece into a trunk for it to become the subject of doctoral theses. For a week, I lived with the score. I would try to plink out some of the piano parts on the dusty grand in the living room, but the melodies were dissonant, unsettling. They felt like a key turning in the wrong lock, grating and unnatural. Yet there was a frightening logic to the chaos. Then I noticed something else. In the margins, next to the most bizarre musical phrases, were tiny, almost invisible symbols drawn in sepia ink. They weren't musical notations. One looked like the alchemical symbol for Mercury, another like the constellation Orion, a third like a Norse rune, and the watermark on the thick, handmade paper. It wasn't the crest of a paper mill. It was a double-headed eagle, clutching not a scepter and orb, but a compass and a square, a Masonic emblem. A cold dread, mixed with an exhilarating thrill, washed over me. This was not a piece of music. It was a cipher, a complex multi-layered key disguised as a symphony. I realized I was standing at the threshold of a mystery far deeper and more elaborate than I could have ever imagined. My job was no longer to appraise the contents of this apartment. It was to decipher them. I closed the heavy leather cover of the score, and in the profound quiet of the room, I could almost hear it, the unheard notes of the symphony of echoes, and it felt like it was calling to me, a silent, insistent melody, promising a story that only I could uncover. The symbols on the margins of the score became my obsession. I've turned Alara's living room into an investigation headquarters. The walls were covered with printouts of pages, photographs of symbols, maps of old Europe. I felt like the hero of a detective novel, trapped in a room with the most difficult mystery of his life. I started with the simplest one, the constellation of Orion. Next to it was a particularly difficult passage for the cello. I stared at the sheet music for hours until I realized the number of notes in each musical phrase corresponded to the numerical values of the stars in the constellation. These were the coordinates. Not geographical, but something else. After several days of frustration, I tried to match them with the location of the books in Alara's huge library. And it worked. The coordinates pointed to specific books on the shelves. First book, Architecture of St. Petersburg, section on St. Isaac's Cathedral. The second, Secret Societies of Europe. Third, a rare edition of Dante's Divine Comedy. In each of these books, on a specific page, the number of which was also encoded in music, I found a single word circled in pencil: the cathedral, society, hell. These were fragments of the key, but what did they discover? I was stumped. Symbols, coordinates, and words. It was too much for one person. That's when I remembered the business card I found in one of Alara's desk drawers. The name Mikhail Vorontsov and an address near the Hermitage were stamped on it. There was a strange title under the name Keeper of Invisible Collections. I decided to take a chance. Perhaps this man knew something about my grandmother's secret life. Vorontsov's workshop was located in the basement of an old apartment building. He was a restorer of antique books and maps, and his tiny establishment was filled with the smell of leather bindings and paste. Vorontsov himself was an old man with clear, piercing blue eyes and hands covered with scars from bookbinding knives. He listened to me in silence while I stammered and told him about the apartment, the chest, and the score. When I showed him the pictures of the symbols, he nodded as if he saw an old acquaintance. "I've been waiting for this call for almost 20 years, he said quietly, since Ilara gave me the key and the instructions. She always said that only a member of her family would be able to take the first test. What's the key? What are the instructions?" Vorontsov walked over to a huge antique globe that stood in the corner. He clicked on a point in the Antarctic region, and the globe opened with a soft click, revealing a secret safe. Inside, on a velvet lining, lay a strange object. It was an astrolabe dial made of darkened brass, covered with the same symbols as the score. "Ilara was not just an artist, Alexei," Vorontsov said, handing me a heavy CD. "She was a member of the society, a very old society. They call themselves architects. Their history goes back to the guilds of medieval cathedral builders, but their true purpose is not to build buildings, but to preserve knowledge, knowledge that is considered too dangerous for the rest of the world." He told me that the Symphony of Silence is not just a cipher, it's a map leading to one of the architects' hiding places, where something they call the primordial echo is kept. "What is it?" I asked. "I do not know," admitted Vorontsov. "This is the most guarded secret of the society. Legends say that this is knowledge that can change the course of human history. Ilara was one of his guardians. But there was a split in society. A faction has emerged, the Restorers, who believe that this knowledge does not need to be hidden. They believe that it should be used to correct the mistakes of humanity, to rebuild the world at their discretion. They've been hunting for the echo for almost a century. Ilara hid the symphony card so they wouldn't get it. My world has turned upside down. Secret societies, dangerous knowledge. My eccentric grandmother turned out to be a player in an invisible war for the fate of the world. The astrolabe is the key to decoding," Vorontsov continued. "Every detail of the score, tempo, key, even the types of instruments, corresponds to certain settings on this disc. If you combine them correctly, musical phrases will turn into precise geographical coordinates. But the map is incomplete. Ilara divided it into 3 parts to keep it safe. She entrusted the other 2 parts to 2 other keepers. Their names are also encoded in the music." We spent the whole night in his workshop, substituting the words I found, cathedral, society, hell, into the dial of the astrolabe. We were able to decipher the first 2 names and their location. The first was an antique dealer from Prague named Jakub. The second is a professor of music history from Florence named Sofia. "You have to find them, Alexei," Vorontsov said, his face serious. "The Restorers do not know that Ilara is dead, but sooner or later they will realize that the card is activated. From the moment you started this investigation, you became a target too. They will be looking for you. Be careful. Don't trust anyone." He gave me an old leather bag. Inside was a passport with a different name, a wad of cash in various currencies, and a small, heavy pistol. "I hoped this day would never come," he said. "Ilara wanted you to live a normal life, but apparently fate has other plans. Go ahead, and try not to die." I walked out of his studio into the pre-dawn streets of St. Petersburg. The city I knew is gone. Now it was a chessboard, and the invisible player had just made his move. I was no longer an antique appraiser. I was a messenger in an ancient war, and in my hands was the first part of the most dangerous map in the world. I booked a ticket for the next flight to Prague, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure in the shadows that I hadn't noticed before. Paranoia has become my new companion. Prague greeted me with a golden autumn and a feeling like I was in the pages of a Gothic novel, a city of labyrinths, narrow streets, and shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. I settled in a small boarding house in the Malastrana district under the name of a fake passport that Vorontsov had given me. The score and the astrolabe were in my backpack, which I did not take off for a second, feeling their weight, both physical and metaphorical. The address of the antique shop of Jakub, the second curator, led me to an alley so narrow that two people could barely separate in it. The shop was called the Kunstkamera and was packed with even stranger things than Ilara's apartment: alchemical retorts, antique medical instruments, maps of the starry sky painted on human skin. It was a place where science, art, and black magic met over a cup of tea. Behind the counter was a young man with tired eyes and a beard who looked like he hadn't slept in days. It wasn't Jakub. "Jakub is not here," he said shortly when I asked. His name was Tomasz, and he was Jakub's grandson. Did he leave?" I asked, trying to hide my disappointment. Tomasz smiled bitterly. "You could say that. It died a week ago, a heart attack." My stomach turned cold. A week ago. It was around the same time that I opened Ilara's chest. "A coincidence?" Vorontsov warned me. "They'll know that the card is activated." I didn't know what to do. Without the fragment of Jakub's map, I was at a dead end. I was about to leave when Thomas called out to me. "You're not just a tourist, are you?" "What is it?" he asked, studying my face carefully. "My grandfather said that one day a man would come with questions about quiet music. He left it for you." He reached under the counter and took out a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Inside, on a cushion of black velvet, lay not the second part of the score, but something completely different. It was an old phonographic wax roller, which was used at the end of the 19th century. "Before my grandfather died, he was very worried," Tomasz said. "He was talking about restorers. He said they got too close. He destroyed his part of the score. He said it was the only way to break the chain. But he made this record. He said it was an echo of his part of the map, and that the architect will understand." My heart started beating with renewed vigor. The card was not completely lost. But how do I listen to this roller? I needed an Edison phonograph, a rare antique. "There's only one working copy in the city," Tomasz said, as if reading my mind, "at the National Museum of Technology. But it's in a closed exhibit. There is no access there." While we were talking, a woman came into the shop. She was elegantly dressed, about 40 years old, with a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to see everything. She introduced herself as Dr. Ingrid Schmidt, a historian from the University of Berlin. She said that she was writing a book about secret societies in Prague and would like to ask Tomasz a few questions about his grandfather, who was a well-known expert in this field. Her appearance was too timely to be an accident. An alarm went off inside me. While she was distracting Tomasz with questions, I noticed a bracelet on her wrist, a silver chain with a single pendant, a stylized trowel, the symbol of the restorers, which Vorontsov warned me about. She was one of them. I realized that I had to act quickly. While Thomas was busy, I slipped out of the shop unnoticed, clutching a box with a wax roller in my pocket. I didn't look back, but I could feel her cold, appraising gaze on my back. Now it was a race. I needed to get to the museum and listen to the recording before she realized that I had taken something away. It was almost impossible to get into the closed exposition of the Museum of Technology, but my work as an appraiser has given me some knowledge. I knew that such museums always have a back door, restoration workshops. Using my remaining cash and my fake passport, I pulled off a scam. I called the museum, posing as an assistant to a wealthy collector who supposedly wants to donate a rare collection of ancient scientific instruments to the museum. I made an appointment with the head curator the next morning to assess the storage conditions in their workshops. The plan worked. The next morning, I was shown into the museum's inner sanctum, huge, light-filled halls where restorers worked on antique cars, steam engines, and astronomical instruments. And in the far corner, covered with a case, there was an Edison phonograph. While the guardian was distracted by a phone call, I only had a few minutes. With trembling hands, I took off the case, installed the roller, and activated the mechanism. There was a crack, a hiss, and then voice. Jakub's old, cracked voice, apparently recorded a few hours before his death. He spoke a mixture of Czech and German, but the musical terms were universal. He wasn't humming a tune, he was describing her. The key is D minor, but with a lowered second step, Phrygian scale. Temp, grave, grave. A glass harmonica enters. Its arpeggios are a sequence of prime numbers. Beware of the siren's voice. She's lying. Florence, Ponte Vecchio. Look for the one who lost her voice. The recording stopped. I barely had time to remove the roller and cover the phonograph when the keeper returned. I finished the inspection and left the museum, my heart pounding with adrenaline and the information I received. Florence, Ponte Vecchio, Sophia, professor of music history. But what did the phrase, "look for the one who lost her voice" mean? And the warning about the siren? When I went outside, I saw her, Ingrid Schmidt. She was standing on the other side of the street, looking right at me. There was no surprise or anger on her face, just a cold, calculating interest, like that of a scientist watching a lab rat in a maze. She knew I was at the museum. She knew that I had listened to the recording. She didn't try to stop me. She was just watching, and it was scarier than any chase. It meant that she was sure that I was taking her exactly where she needed to go. The game has become more complicated. I wasn't just a messenger. I was the bait, and the trap was waiting for me in Florence. Florence was a dazzling trap. The city, where every stone-breathed art seemed like the perfect place to hide a secret. But for me, his beauty was just a facade. Around every corner, in every shadow of Michelangelo's statues, I saw observers, people who read the newspaper for too long, a couple kissing on the bridge, whose eyes were not following each other, but following me. Ingrid Schmidt had set up her net, and I was a fly flying right into the middle of it. I started looking for Sophia Romano, a professor of music history, whose address was encrypted in Jakub's record. I found it in the old building of the University of Florence, but her office was locked. Colleagues said that she had been on sick leave for several months. "It's a tragic story," an elderly lady from the archive told me. "Our Sophia, she wasn't just a professor, she was La Romano, the greatest mezzo-soprano of his generation, until that accident happened." "An accident?" I asked again. "The fire at the La Fenice Opera House in Venice a few years ago. She was there. I inhaled a lot of smoke. The ligaments were irretrievably damaged. She will never be able to sing again. She's lost her voice, her everything. Since then, she has become a recluse. Look for the one who lost her voice." Jakub's cipher was literal. I found her home address, an apartment in an old palazzo overlooking the Arno River. The door was opened by a young man with worried eyes named Matteo, her assistant and, as I understood it, the only person she trusted. He was ready to kick me out the door, but I uttered a code phrase that I learned from Vorontsov, a phrase that only keepers know. Silence is just a pause in music. His expression changed. He let me in. Sophia Romano was sitting in a darkened room, surrounded by books and scores. She was still beautiful, but her face bore the imprint of an inescapable sadness. She didn't speak. Instead, she used a small tablet on which she quickly typed her answers. "You're late," she typed when I told her my story. "Jakub is dead. Ilara is dead. Society is disintegrating. The game is lost." "No," I replied. "Ilara and Jakub left the way for us. I have the score and the key to it. Jakub had a message. He said that your part of the map still exists." She looked at me skeptically. I took out the astrolabe and the score, spreading them out on the table. I explained how the cipher works. Her eyes, accustomed to reading the most complex pieces of music, lit up with professional interest. My part, I destroyed it after the fire, she typed. I thought the restorers were trying to kill me to take her away. I burned all the notes. Jakob said it was an echo, I insisted. Something that only you could understand. He warned about the siren's voice that is lying. Sophia thought about it. Her fingers hovered over the tablet. The siren, she typed. In mythology, sirens lured sailors with their singing, leading them to their deaths, a false voice leading the wrong way. Suddenly she jerked her head up. After the fire, when I realized that I couldn't sing anymore, I donated all my personal archives to the Luigi Cherubini Conservatory. All my notes, work scores, diaries. I wanted to erase my past. But there was one thing among them, a unique tuning fork made to order for me. He was tuned to the highest note I could ever hit, the fa of the third octave. My lost voice. I've always said that this sound is my whole soul. We understood at the same time. This was the echo of the map. But when Matteo and I arrived at the conservatory, we were in for a blow. The archive was closed for an emergency inventory. I saw her off, the invited expert from Berlin, Dr. Ingrid Schmidt. She beat us to it. The siren was her. She created a false trail, making Sophia believe that her part of the map was destroyed, while Ingrid herself searched for it in the archives. She knows, I told Matteo. She knows about the tuning fork. We need to get there before her. Last night we carried out the craziest plan of my life. Using Matteo's knowledge of the conservatory building and my skills as an appraiser in handling old locks, we penetrated the archive. It was a maze of shelves stretching into the darkness. We found a section with Sophia's archives. Boxes, boxes, boxes. We sorted through them in a feverish hurry, by the light of flashlights, and then Matteo found him. A small mahogany case. Inside, on the velvet, lay an elegant silver tuning fork, but as soon as we took it, the lights went on in the hall. Ingrid Schmidt was standing in the doorway, and behind her, two men with strong physiques. "Thank you, gentlemen," she said with an icy smile. "I knew that sooner or later you would lead me to him. Your sentimentality is very predictable. Give me the tuning fork, Alexei. Your role in this play is over." I looked at Matteo. There was panic in his eyes. There was no way out. And then there was a sound. Clear, high-pitched, incredibly powerful sound. It didn't come from a tuning fork. It came from everywhere. It vibrated in the air, making the dust motes tremble in the lamplight. Everyone turned around. Sophia was standing in the shadows at the other end of the room. She was holding a strange object in her hands, a small device with a horn similar to an antique megaphone. She raised it to her throat, and the sound started again. It wasn't her voice. It was a mechanical, amplified sound, but the note was flawless. Fa of the third octave. An electric laryngophone tuned to her lost voice. A sound wave hit the shelves. Heavy leather-bound volumes fell from the top shelf directly above Ingrid's head. She and her men jumped back, and in that moment of chaos, Matteo grabbed my arm. "This way!" he shouted, and we rushed into a side passage I didn't know about. It was an old service tunnel connecting the conservatory with the neighboring theater. We ran through the dark, dusty corridors until the sounds of the chase faded behind us. We got out onto an empty night street and, without stopping, ran to Sophia's house. She was already there, panting and clutching her throat. She was waiting for us. We were all assembled, 3 guardians, or at least what's left of them. We've locked all the doors. That night, we put the map back together. My score was the main grid. The information from Jakub's roller provided the key to the keys and rhythm, and Sophia's tuning fork. Microscopic numbers were engraved on its handle. This was the last variable needed for the equation. We have entered all the data into the astrolabe. Her discs spun, the symbols lined up in a row, and finally she gave the result. Not a city, not a country. It was the name and coordinates. Observatoire du Silence Perdu, Observatory of Lost Silence, an abandoned astronomical observatory high in the Swiss Alps, a place known for its unique acoustics, where the silence was so absolute that you could hear your own heartbeat. We found him, the hiding place of the architects. But when we looked at the finished map, at the complex pattern it formed, Sophia suddenly turned pale. She grabbed the tablet and typed quickly, her fingers trembling. "This is not a map to the cache," read the message. "Look at the structure. It looks like a lock diagram. A very complicated lock. We are not looking for treasure." She paused, her eyes filled with horror. "We're looking for a prison. And this symphony, this is not a map. This is the key to open the door." The realization that we were not looking for treasure, but for a prison, changed everything. The air in Sophia's room became heavy, oppressive. We were not adventurers, but burglars, carrying the key to a cell in which something so dangerous was locked that an entire secret society devoted centuries to its protection. "Alara didn't want me to find this," Sophia typed, her eyes full of new understanding. "She wanted me to understand. I realized that some doors should never be open." "But the restorers are already here," I objected. "Ingrid is right behind us. If we don't get there first, they'll open that door. Our only chance is to understand what exactly we are protecting." The journey to the Swiss Alps was a nervous, silent truce. We rode the night train, gliding across Europe like a shadow. Matteo, Sophia's loyal assistant, proved invaluable. He arranged the tickets, found a safe route, and constantly monitored to see if there was a tail behind us. Sophia, using her laptop, hacked into the archives, looking for any information about the Observatory of Lost Silence. She found out that the observatory was built at the end of the 19th century by an eccentric astronomer and philanthropist who was one of the leaders of the architects. Officially, it was intended to study the cosmic ether, but unofficially, as we now understood, its architecture and location were chosen not to look at the stars, but to listen to the silence. It was built on the site of a geological anomaly, at a point of absolute acoustic rest. "This is not an observatory," Sophia said through her tablet as the train rattled along the tracks. "It's a resonator, a huge musical instrument disguised as a scientific institution. The building itself is part of the castle." We arrived at a small alpine village at the foot of the mountain. The observatory, like a silver dome, crowned one of the highest and most inaccessible peaks. The only way to get there was by using an old, decommissioned cable car or by walking along a treacherous mountain trail. We chose a path. The ascent took almost a day. We walked through clouds, along narrow ledges, under a piercing wind that howled in the rocks as if playing its own wild symphony. The whole world remained below. Here, at the top of the world, it was just us, the mountains, and our goal. The observatory was both beautiful and sinister, metal and stone frozen in ice. The main dome was surrounded by several towers connected by covered galleries. It all looked like some kind of futuristic fortress. There were no doors, no locks, no handles, just a smooth, seamless obsidian wall at the base of the main tower. "The castle," I whispered. "The symphony is the key." Sophia nodded. She pointed to a series of holes in the wall arranged in a circle, similar to organ flutes. Then, on metal plates of different sizes, embedded in the ground in front of the wall. "Acoustic lock," she explained on the tablet. "It will open only when it hears the correct frequency sequence. A dissonant chord from the score, the one that can't be played on ordinary instruments. That's what the glass harmonica and serpentine were for. These were not instruments, but descriptions of sound waves. We didn't have an orchestra, but we had Sophia. She took out her electric laryngophone and tuning fork. Matteo, following her instructions, found several pieces of quartz among the stones. Using a tuning fork as a reference, Sophia started tuning us up. She gave me one crystal, Matteo the other. She showed with what force and at what angle it is necessary to hit metal plates on the ground with them in order to extract the necessary ultra-low tone. She herself, with the help of her device, was going to reproduce the central, highest, and most complex note. We've rehearsed several times. It was like a crazy ritual, 3 figures on top of the world, trying to play music that no one has ever heard. "Are you ready?" I whispered. They nodded. At Sophia's sign, we struck. A low humming sound from the plates swept across the ground. At the same moment, Sophia let out her shrill, mechanical note, and the wind, passing through the holes in the wall, added its own howling overtone to this chord. Nothing happened for a few seconds, and then we felt it. Vibration, a deep rumble coming from the ground. The stone wall in front of us began to move away slowly, without a single sound, revealing a dark passage. We did it. The door was open. The passage smelled of cold and ozone. We stepped inside, into absolute darkness. I turned on the flashlight. We were in a long, descending corridor, the walls of which were covered with strange, unearthly-looking crystals that seemed to absorb light. The corridor led us into a huge, spherical room in the very heart of the observatory. In the center, suspended in a complex system of gyroscopes and counterweights, was a huge, perfectly polished obsidian crystal the size of a car. There was a barely noticeable, low hum coming from it. "The primordial echo," whispered Matteo. It wasn't knowledge in a book or an artifact in a box. It was something alive, or at least a resonant one. The buzzing penetrated not into the ears, but directly into the skull. It evoked strange fragmentary images in my mind. Galaxies that are born and dying, geometric patterns, the faces of people I've never seen. It wasn't just information. It was the matrix, the basis of reality, expressed in sound, and she was unstable. I felt her power, her potential, and its boundless danger. To change that vibration was to change everything. And at that moment of awe, footsteps sounded behind us in the hallway, and the voice, cool, confident, and full of triumph. "Bravo!" Ingrid Schmidt said, stepping out of the shadows. Her men stood behind her, guns drawn. "The overture is over, and now it's the finale." She didn't follow us down the path. She was just waiting for us to do all the work for her. The trap snapped shut. We were locked in the prison, along with its only prisoner and the jailers who had just arrived to free him. We were trapped. The light of her people's lanterns picked out our pale faces and the shiny alien surface of the central crystal from the darkness. The echo's humming became louder, more intrusive, as if it was responding to an intrusion. "What an irony, isn't it?" Ingrid said, walking slowly around us. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. "The architects built the world's most complex music box to hide their secret, and you, the descendants of the Guardians, brought me the key right into my hands." "What are you going to do?" I asked, trying to gain time. "Something that architects have been afraid to do for centuries," she replied. "Do not guard. Fix it. This crystal." It's not just an echo of creation. It's his tuning fork. It contains an ideal, primordial frequency of reality. But for thousands of years, humanity has brought so much dissonance to this symphony: wars, hatred, greed. We have upset the very instrument of the universe. The restorers will restore it to its original harmony. We will reconfigure reality. Let's erase the mistakes. "You're talking about genocide," Sophia said softly, using her voice box. The sound was mechanical, but the words were full of contempt. Erase everyone who doesn't fit into your harmony. A necessary sacrifice for the sake of a perfect world, Ingrid snapped. And you can't stop me. One of her people took out a device that looked like a sophisticated sonar from a briefcase. It was a transmitter designed to interact with the crystal to impose a new frequency on it. We were unarmed, but we had something that she didn't have. We understood music. While Ingrid was preparing her device, Sophia was typing quickly on her tablet, which was hanging around her neck, and showed me and Matteo. The score. It's not just the key. This is also a countermeasure. Do you remember the pages with silence? These are not pauses. This is the antithesis, an acoustic black hole. If you reproduce it here, in this resonator, you can create a zone of absolute silence, mute the echo, reboot it. It was a crazy, desperate plan, but he was the only one. We needed to distract them. Matteo, the loyal and brave Matteo, made the first move. He rushed at one of the guards, trying to snatch the weapon from him. A shot rang out. The bullet ricocheted off one of the wall crystals. Chaos ensued. While the guards were trying to pin Matteo down, I rushed to the opposite wall. I remembered the location of the silent pages in the score. It wasn't a melody. It was a sequence of blows. Rhythm. "Sophia!" I shouted. "The rhythm of silence!" She understood. Ingrid turned around, her face contorted with rage. "Stop him!" But it was too late. Sophia raised her device to her throat again, but this time she didn't make a sound. She only opened and closed her mouth, creating interruptions in the airflow, which her device turned into a series of ultra-low frequency clicks, a rhythmic pattern from the score. At the same time, using the stone I still clutched in my hand, I began tapping the second part of this silent rhythm on the wall crystals. The observatory hall, this perfect resonator, reacted instantly. The low-frequency pulses began to overlap, extinguishing the rest of the sounds. The humming of the central crystal became intermittent. The guard's shots sounded muffled, as if from underwater. Ingrid shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the growing acoustic void. And then there was absolute, utter, unnatural silence. It wasn't just the lack of sound. It was a physical sensation. Pressure in the ears. It feels like you're being immersed in cotton wool. The light from the lanterns began to fade, and the crystals on the walls stopped glowing. Echo, in the center of the hall, it fell silent. In this deafening silence, in almost total darkness, we were equal. Ingrid and her people were disoriented and scared. They used to rely on orders, on coordination, and we are used to silence. I saw Sophia's silhouette. She was pointing at the passage we had entered from. It was our only chance. Grabbing Matteo, who was wounded in the shoulder, we rushed to the exit. When we ran out of the observatory onto the snow-covered peak, the sound slowly began to return. First, the sound of the wind, then our own labored breathing. Behind us, the stone door began to close with a dull rumble. The lock was rebooting. We left Ingrid and her people trapped inside, in total darkness and silence. With the silent artifact they craved, they became prisoners of the prison they themselves wanted to open. The epilogue. Several years have passed. The world has not changed. Wars and hatred have not disappeared. The symphony of humanity is still full of dissonances, and maybe that's what it's all about, in imperfection. The three of us became the new guardians, not an artifact, but a mystery. We've sealed the entrance to the observatory so that no one will ever find it again. We returned the score, the astrolabe, and the tuning fork to the lead sealed chest and lowered it to the bottom of the deepest alpine lake. Some stories shouldn't be told. Matteo has fully recovered and has become not just an assistant for Sophia, but a family. Sophia never regained her voice, but she found a new way to speak to the world. She's writing. She writes music, but not encrypted anymore. but simple, human, full of sadness and hope, and me. I went back to my antique shop, but I no longer value things by their market value. I look for stories in them. I know that behind the most ordinary facade, behind the most boring biography, there can be a whole symphony, a story about love, sacrifice, and the choice we make between harmony and freedom. My great-aunt Alara didn't leave me a curse or a treasure. She left me a lesson. Some doors lead to dangerous knowledge, some are for glory, and some of them go back to themselves. And the most important choice in life is to figure out which one is not worth opening. The story of the Symphony of Silence is a reminder that the people we think we know often live lives we can hardly imagine. Behind each quiet facade, there may be a whole world of heroism, sacrifice, and untold stories. Our channel is a home for such stories. We seek out and share real, strange, and deeply human stories that explore the hidden corners of family, history, and art. If you want to hear more stories that stay with you long after they're over, please subscribe and become a part of our community. Don't forget to like it if this trip was interesting for you. It helps us a lot to find and revive new forgotten stories. Thank you for your time, and be kind to the ghosts of your own past.